Oddly, I call myself a traditionalist. I did ceramics at school, so I've done pottery all my life. But then about 20 years ago, I was looking at architecture and thinking how the design of architecture is moving really fast, and that was through the use of computers. And I thought, well, in ceramics, people just aren't using computers, So, and I was interested in computers, so I started working more in computers because my work is often about form, and in 3D modeling programs, you could really make interesting forms. So at first, there was no 3D printing for clay then, but it was because of the ideas that I could get through using computers that I started using computers, yeah. So I spoke first about using 3D modeling programs, and that's how I started. But my sort of artistic interest is in that area between art and nature, and that is, how do we find nature so beautiful? And then nature has this underlying code about it, DNA code, and everything grows from a cell. And in computer coding, I was seeing that people could start growing shapes through code. So I then, this is the way I wanted to work, and I've taught myself basic coding. So my workflow is actually to work in Java code, and I write the code, and this starts giving me the form, and then I can, capture that form. I save the form as a 3D file. I then often have to edit that in a 3D modeling program, a bit like you would with a photograph with Photoshop. So I edit it, I can change the shape, you clean it up. That then saves as a file type called STL. Then that needs to go to another software to prepare it for the 3D printer. So there's a software that really just slices it into layers. And the printer, interestingly, is a bit like traditional pottery. That, sort of the real first pottery was a coil of clay and a coil of clay all built up, sort of like Africans make pots. I've made pots like that. It gives you much more variety of shape. And that's probably why I like 3D printing. I can work on the pottery wheel, but it's always a round shape. But I'm more interested in, sort of the shapes that coil building can do. And now this is computer-guided coil building. So the 3D file is then put on an SD card, and the SD card put into the printer. The printer slowly builds the form, depending on what scale. It might be 1 hour, 7 hours, that's a big piece, 7 hours. You then dry it, and then it goes to the kiln, and it's traditional process from there on. So it has to be fired in the kiln like normal, glazed, and then you get your ceramic object. Well, I was invited, and if you get invited, it's always very nice. But the invitation was particularly because of, the digital knowledge. And that intrigued me, is that there are not many, ceramics is quite a traditional area. And I work a lot in education, because the education realizes for the future they need to get up to speed with using computation within ceramics. But there's not many people who have the knowledge. And fortunately, I've built up this knowledge. So to be actually asked to come and work in a factory that is doing digital work already became very interesting for me. So that's why I came to LAUFEN. Working in my own studio, I have a smallish kiln. I mean, it's 1 meter big. I have to prepare my clay. So to come and work in a factory like this, the clay is ready prepared. I can just take a wheelbarrow and go and get clay. And then they've got the continuous kiln that is firing all the time. So once the work is made, it can go into the kiln and be through within a couple of days. And that's not a working process that I can do at home.